What will the merger between TPG and Vodafone mean for Aussie consumers?
And does Google's new smart home speaker really take it to the max?
Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by a man who never wants to hear the word spill again unless it's in relation to somebody else's beer, Adam Turner, as we go behind the headlines in search of the bigger picture. We've got not one but two special guests this week. Firstly, to talk telco news, we're once again joined by ZDNet Australia Deputy Editor Corinne Reichert. Corinne, welcome back.
Happy to be back.
We'll also be joined a little later by Jez Ford from Sound+Image magazine for a good hard listen to the Google Home Max. But first, over to the news desk. Adam, what's happening in tech news?
Aussie online retailer Kogan is going hard on the smart home space, adding support for both Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa to its smart home lineup. Along with the usual suspects like smart televisions, smart light bulbs, smart power switches with energy monitoring, Kogan's also getting into appliances like small portable heaters and coolers. Apple fans have been left out in the cold, although Kogan does sell a range of Apple-compatible gear like Elgato's Eve.
It's been an interesting week in Australian politics, to be certain, but amongst the chaos, one piece of government business that did pass was the clarification around which companies would be allowed to build 5G network infrastructure in Australia. Acting Home Affairs Minister Scott Morrison and Communications Minister Mitch Fifield, as he was at the time, ruled out vendors that could not adequately protect the network from interference, which in this context effectively means Chinese firms such as ZTE and Huawei. Huawei is already protesting the decision, stating on Twitter that it had been informed by the government that Huawei and ZTE have been banned from providing 5G technology to Australia, and that this is an extremely disappointing result for consumers.
Only a week before unveiling its next corporate plan, NBN has announced Chief Financial Officer Stephen Rue as new head of the business to replace outgoing CEO Bill Morrow. Rue replaces Morrow on September 1 with a base pay of $1.8 million per year, with a handy 50% annual incentive bonus should key milestones be achieved. Rue joins NBN Co in 2014 after 17 years at News Limited, including the last 10 as Chief Financial Officer.
Nvidia has unveiled its next generation of graphics cards at Gamescom in Germany. The RTX 2080 Ti, RTX 2080 and RTX 2070 are your new objects of desire if you're a gamer, with neural processors, variable rate shading and real-time ray tracing features. They're not exactly going to be cheap, however, with a top-tier RTX 2080 Ti setting you back just under $2,000 if you're exceptionally keen. So Adam, the NBN board has decided, and unfortunately my application, which basically consisted of I'll do it for a lot of money and no responsibility, didn't sway them, and instead we're getting Stephen Rue. Will, to get the obvious joke out of the way, people rue that decision?
I think at this point he seems like a smart choice. It makes more sense than bringing in an outsider who needs to get up to speed. I'm assuming they checked in with Sol to see what he's doing these days. I think it would have been a mistake to go further afield, try and keep it business as usual. Corinne, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I mean, the chair, Ziggy Switkowski, said that NBN wanted to look internally for a replacement because it's only 2 years away from being finished in terms of the actual rollout, so they wanted someone with first-hand experience, and he's definitely had that. I mean, he's been CFO there since 2014, so he's been there for 4 years, and he got his first real taste of coming under fire last week during a hearing of the inquiry into the rollout by the Joint Standing Committee when he announced NBN's new fixed wireless pricing, which of course was more expensive than it is in the cities for the fixed line. So, I mean, he has a lot of experience in the actual rollout itself, the technologies behind it, the rationale. He knows the board members. He's faced Parliament before. So I can understand why they would go with an internal candidate this late in the piece.
I guess with NBN saying that they're about 75% built, they figured they could put a money man in charge. But do you think that's what the NBN needs?
Well, look, I mean, they said during their results report last week that I think it was 99% is now either in design, in construction, or already ready to go. So I feel like they're just sort of putting someone safe at the helm with not many more decisions to really be made. I think the whole plan is done, and they are unveiling their corporate plan next week, I believe. So, yeah, I mean, by the time September 1 rolls around, the corporate plan is out for the final year, really, of the rollout, and there's not much more to be done. He just sort of sits at the head and doesn't really make many decisions.
And he does have a bit of experience with underdogs as well. He became chair of Melbourne Storm after they got busted for their salary cap issues and turned the club around and they won a premiership. So, you know, that could be the kind of skills that they need over at the NBN right now.
Exactly.
So, Alex, TPG was the big player that was going to come into the mobile space and shake everything up. The big, like we were talking about, the fourth channel for TV networks. This was going to be the big fourth player, but maybe TPG and Vodafone are getting into bed. What's the story there?
Well, look, they haven't formally hooked up, but they're definitely swiping in the right direction at this stage.
They are definitely
having announced that they're looking into a merger, although everything that they've said so far is essentially non-binding, which kind of makes it hard to make definitive announcements around what it'll do and what it'll mean. But given the structure of both companies, I think this is going to be a really fascinating merger if it goes ahead. Corinne, what's your take?
Yeah, so huge news today on this. This is probably the biggest story of the year in telco, really. And I mean, of course, there's been speculation for years now that the two companies would merge, especially when they held a press conference. It was around 3 years ago. Everyone thought they were going to announce a merger, but what they ended up announcing was that $1 billion deal for TPG to move its MVNO customers from Optus to Vodafone, while it built Vodafone a fibre fixed line network. But then, of course, last year, TPG bought up a bunch of 700 megahertz spectrum in the auction and announced its own $1.9 billion network, which it has been rolling out small cells for across metro areas and is supposed to be launching any day now. I've actually been surprised that it hasn't launched yet, and maybe this merger is the reason why. You know, they've been having talks behind closed doors about it, because they did say mid-2018, and we're past that now. So, and look, Vodafone also bought a bunch of 700 megahertz spectrum at the same time as TPG to extend its own mobile network. And Vodafone hasn't ever really mentioned anything concrete about 5G plans yet. I asked Iñaki, the Vodafone CEO, a couple of weeks ago during Vodafone's financial results call about 5G plans, and he was pretty vague about it. So maybe they've been planning on this merger so that they can leverage TPG's thousands of small cells for that, because of course 5G requires network densification, which means a lot of small cells.
So just to refresh my memory on the spectrum auctions last year, now TPG spent something ridiculous like $1.2 billion on spectrum. Is that 5G spectrum or 4G spectrum? How will it fit in with what they already have and what Vodafone has?
It's just a mobile broadband spectrum. I mean, 700 can be used to build out a mobile network. It's not necessarily 5G specific, which is more 3.6 gig. And then, you know, up in the 28 gigahertz, the millimeter wave spectrum. But with so many small cells that they're building out, those can be transitioned over to 5G. And there is the 5G spectrum auction taking place later this year. So, I mean, a combined TPG Vodafone entity could definitely bring the battle to Telstra a lot more than just those two alone in terms of a spectrum auction. They'll have a lot more money to play with.
Although that would depend on the merger going ahead fairly quickly, I would have thought. They could end up in the interesting position where, because they haven't come to terms yet, they end up bidding against each other for assets they might end up collectively owning.
That is true. I mean, it depends how well the talks are going. If they're all basically in agreement and they just need, you know, shareholder approval and regulatory approval, which of course is a big stumbling block. I mean, is the regulator going to approve such a huge merger in telco after all of the other mergers over recent years? You know, if the talks are going well, maybe they will pool resources and TPG will bid for it all. But then what if the talks don't go through? I mean, it will be interesting to see if they do bid against each other.
You mentioned actually the delay in TPG rolling out its mobile network. They'd always played that a little bit fast and loose in terms of their timing, because when they announced they were going to trial their mobile $9.99 a month plan, they basically said second half of 2018. They've still got a little bit of time on that one, but it does bring up this other interesting thing, which is to do with what that merged entity does with its pricing overall, because TPG is famously a budget player, and not that Vodafone's super expensive in the mobile telco space, but it's certainly a bit more premium in terms of where it wants to be for unlimited. How well do you see that meshing in a cultural sense?
Yeah, I mean, like, in terms of competition, they're really going to bring it to Optus, especially both in fixed line and mobile, and eventually Telstra too, at those lower price points. I mean, TPG was announcing that its mobile plans were going to be free for the first 6 months for the first however many customers. And then after that, $9.99. And Vodafone's already the lowest price network. So they're definitely going to absolutely hold down that part of the market. I mean, combining TPG's low prices with Vodafone's $5 a day roaming, I mean, who is not going to want to move to that network when they have to pay, you know, apart from regional users, when they have to pay so much more for Telstra, for example? It's going to bring a lot more competition to the market if those two merge.
Am I right in thinking that TPG is the third largest telco in Australia now, or are they already up to second? And if not, would this push them up to second?
I believe they are third in fixed line, possibly after Optus. I'm not 100% sure. And then, of course, fourth in mobile.
Yeah. So this would put them pretty close to second if these two get together behind Telstra.
Yes. It would put them very close to second, if not definitely second.
Well, it's interesting in that TPG would gain a whole bunch of mobile customers because that's what Vodafone's got, and Vodafone would gain a whole lot of fixed line customers because it's been quite slow in its own NBN rollout plans. And again, there's a bit of a mishmash in terms of pricing, and especially, I guess, in terms of branding, because TPG owns a whole slew of smaller players as well. What do you think this could mean for brands like iiNet and Internode and Transact and all the other TPG sub-brands?
I think they'll still keep them around. I mean, they've already got established customer bases, and maybe then they'll just have, you know, a TPG Vodafone customer base for fixed line. And Vodafone MVNO's out its network to a lot of other providers as well, like Kogan. So what does it mean for them? Will they become part of this whole, you know, fixed line and mobile offering? Because Kogan wholesales both Vodafone's fixed line and its mobile network. So there's a lot more customers that are going to be thrown into it, and it just depends whether they're going to keep all of these sub-brands around or whether they're just going to consolidate them all. But they all play in, you know, slightly different areas of the market. You've got the really, really low price ones, or the iiNet ones, which are more based on, you know, better customer service. So it depends whether they want to differentiate all their different brands or just have one big one.
Surely it would have made sense to do this before Vodafone started putting more effort into fixed line.
Well, as I said earlier, we all thought that press conference 3 years ago when they announced their $1 billion deal to sort of share fixed line and mobile was going to be a merger. I mean, it would have made a lot more sense then, but I guess they wanted to maintain their own companies. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they actually do go ahead with it this time. This is definitely the closest they've ever been. We don't know how long those talks have been going on for. There's been media speculation for 3 or 4 years, possibly more. So, yeah, I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire.
One of the things that obviously that the ACCC will have to look at is this kind of competitive element to it, especially in the NBN space, where, you know, one of the reasons for the NBN's existence was to open up competition to smaller players. If you're not TPG, Optus, or Telstra, and you're an ISP, should you be worried?
NBN's opened up its POIs virtually now, so a lot of companies can actually connect, or they can connect via other RSPs to all of the points of interconnect for NBN. So they can still offer a service, but it's harder to compete with, you know, the low prices that TPG Vodafone is going to be able to offer, and the, you know, the land grab that's been going on with Telstra to begin with, which sort of just took all its existing customers over to the NBN without really telling them they're allowed to switch, probably. I know Optus got in a little bit of trouble over that. Yeah, exactly. So it's whether people are aware of the fact that they can choose these smaller providers more so than is it okay if they merge? Because in the NBN sense, they're all just wholesaling the same network.
Some of the analysts that I've been talking to recently have been saying that they'll think there'd be a big consolidation in Australian internet retailers next year. A lot of the small players will either get snapped up or go out of business, and the reason why is that the margins are so thin that the wholesale price is relatively high, yet Australians don't want to pay a lot for broadband, so there's not a lot of money to be made for these little players. I would think this would put even more pressure on those little players. Corinne, do you think that this is going to see greater consolidation next year and more of the little guys disappear?
It's very likely. As I said, I mean, they're not going to be making a lot of money from wholesaling this one network when, the bigger ones can actually afford to drop their prices really low to grab all those customers to begin with, leaving the smaller players with, they have less marketing budget, so people don't know about them. People just go with their existing telco, and they can't do as low prices and buy as much CVC as these bigger players. So they probably will get snapped up or go out of business.
Plus, they don't have benefits like content deals and stuff that some of the big players can, APL rights and stuff like that to bring people in.
That's very true. And I mean, Optus and Telstra are increasingly relying on their content offerings to differentiate themselves. And Vodafone was one of the first to start throwing in things like Netflix streaming with their bundles. So they're all very well able to throw these things in to gain customers. I mean, especially Optus with the EPL. So, I mean, the smaller players just can't compete with that.
So, Alex, a bit of a change of pace here. We're now joined by Jez Ford, editor of Sound+Image magazine. Jez, thanks for joining us this week.
Greetings, gentlemen.
And we're here to talk about the Google Home Max. This is, as they say, the big one. Now, Jez, where does this sort of fit in the pantheon of smart speakers?
Well, I mean, smart speakers is still an area that's developing rapidly. In Australia, we got the Google stuff first, whereas America and the UK got most of the Alexa stuff, had a head start. So I think Australia's sort of a little bit Google-centric. Certainly, I discovered Google taking over my home almost by accident when you realise that suddenly when you open your Google Home app, you can see about 5-10 different products which have all got Chromecast in them, your TV, your smart speaker if you have one, any number of other bits of hi-fi that I might have in for testing. And you can suddenly create a multi-room network just out of Chromecast devices that are kind of just found their way into your home almost by accident. The Google Max is, as you say, the big one. It's their attempt at creating a really musical speaker, because the Google Home and heaven forbid the Mini are not made for music, shall we say. Google Home can play, at a medium level and sound quite pleasant, but as soon as you turn it up, it just drives into unpleasantness. So the Max is really the one that's taking on hi-fi level speakers, particularly from the look of it. As you can see, it looks very much like a Sonos Play 5, and you have to wonder Sonos is not without an occasional legal offering at people who have imitated stuff in the past, but you imagine Google might be quite a big one to take on.
Yeah, it's an homage, I think, is maybe the nicest way to put it. It's an homage to the Play 5.
Yes, that's right. Yes, homage. Yes, good legal term. Yes.
Yes.
So sound-wise, Adam, you actually reviewed it for Sound+Image, so you can speak to this as well as I can. It's certainly comparable to the Play 5 in terms of the output it gives, the level it gives, the ability to hold distortion low up to reasonably high levels. They've done the same thing in that you can pair up two Google Home Maxes to work as a stereo pair, even though they're stereo in themselves. And that's one good thing, is that when you get to this level, at least we're operating back in stereo again. There's been a frightening move in the small speaker market back to mono of late, and the Google Home's a mono speaker, and it's like we're going back 40 years in terms of stereo reproduction.
Get out your old Beatles albums again.
Exactly, yes. Unplug one speaker and listen in mono. I do that. It's sad.
So, look, I mean, I've also reviewed the Google Home Max, and it's certainly a nice device, although it's not small. I mean, you talked about it being very much like the Play 5, but the existing smart speaker space are units that don't take up as much living room space, and that makes me wonder who the Max is for relative to not only the existing Google Assistant speakers from third-party makers like Sony or JBL or LG, but even things like Apple's HomePod.
Yes, I agree. I mean, they are trying for the music market. All the surveys are showing that the smart speakers, one of the biggest things they're being used for, apart from straightforward questions, is for music. And that's a good thing. And size is everything in reproduction. There's no getting around physics. A bigger speaker always sounds better than a smaller speaker. So it's been quite frightening to see people simply reduced down to a small Google Home sized speaker or a small JBL Lynx. The JBL Lynx have done a great job at getting better sound out of the equation, I think, considering that they're priced pretty much at parity. The JBL Link 10 is the same price as the original Google Home. So this is obviously, same as Apple did with the HomePod. They're trying to get up into a respectable music market that can compete with hi-fi. I'd question whether they really do compete with hi-fi, calling hi-fi, what you'd normally get out of a pair of good stereo speakers. And once you get up to the idea of paying, 2 times $580 for a pair of Google Home Maxes, you can be looking at a pretty nice pair of hi-fi active speakers that'll just take you to a significantly higher level. So I'm still a little worried about the downward trend in audio quality and the acceptance factor we've got at it. I don't think people know the difference until they hear it, and when they do hear it, it's easy to recognize, so there is a level above which these smart speakers just aren't reaching at all.
Do you think there's also a space in between the Google Home and the Google Home Max for something that sounds better than the Google Home but isn't going to set you back that much and take up as much space on the bench? Do we need a Google Max Mini, so to speak?
A Google Medium. We need a Google Medium in the middle. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are companies that think you should have every range, every gap in the range plugged, and JBL is one of those. I mean, they've got not only the Link series, which are actually got Google Voice Assistant in them, but they've got a whole load of Chromecast equipped speakers. This is the other thing. So much of real hi-fi is now coming out with either Alexa enabled internals or an actual Chromecast inside. And with any Google Mini, you can slave it to a piece of hi-fi like that, say my preferred output is this hi-fi here. So you could have a name audio system which is triggered from your Google Mini, and that way you're listening to real hi-fi with Google Voice Assistant, and it's like that's really the better solution if you want real good high quality music.
Yeah. Do you think that Amazon are going to sit back at this point and just say, all right, we're never going to win this fight on sound quality with their own first-party speakers? Like the Echo Plus is reasonable, but it's not up there with any of these. Or do you think that they'd be tempted to pull out the big guns as well?
I think Amazon's focus is selling, and I don't think the music side, except as an enabler to get people to buy the speakers and therefore interact with Amazon, is really part of their makeup. And I don't know whether they're bringing in teams which might be able to do that, but you're absolutely right. The current crop of Alexa speakers are not musical at all. Even the taller ones, turn them up and they hurt. It's difficult because even I've got a Google Home. I've got 3 Google equipped smart speakers, one on each floor of the house, and even I'm lazy enough to default to sometimes playing music on them. Even when I've got Chromecast equipped hi-fi sitting right next to them, just because you've got to add a sentence. And so, the danger is that we dumb down once again the level of enjoyment people are going to get from their music. That's what worries me.
Convenience trumps all, I guess.
Always, and it's been a downward spiral from it. We were just getting out of the MP3 side of things. Now storage is so easy. We can stream at CD quality reasonably cheaply. We can stream at 320 from Spotify. It sounds pretty good through a decent hi-fi. And now we've finally got the file quality up from the streaming services. We're dumbing down the speakers. It's frightening. Dumbing down the audio quality, I should say. We're smartening up in terms of intelligence, but dumbing down in order what they can do. Even with Sonos, a nice remark from the guy that runs Project Turntables the other day, and he said, we love the high end of hi-fi, but it's been really bad because the intelligentsia are buying Bose and Sonos because they think the high end of hi-fi is run by lunatics. And that is absolutely a perception if you go into a high-end hi-fi store and you see a $250,000 amplifier sitting in the corner, and in order to get that in your house you'd have to have a team of people come and set it up for you. That's convenience gone the wrong way, gone completely insane. So I totally understand people want something that's easier to set up, but when you've got real hi-fi companies that are doing multi-room audio systems which are all getting Alexa compatibility and Google compatibility. So HEOS has announced to integrate this week that they're now all Alexa enabled, more and more of their speakers, so you can work with those. And then you can get good sound quality on the end of the smart. So to a certain extent, I'd really rather that the IT companies stick to the IT and bridge over to a partnership with hi-fi companies that know what they're doing with sound.
The other side of these, of course, is the smart assistant side of it, and obviously the Google Home Max is no different to any other Google Assistant speaker, but I certainly found in my own testing that its loudness was a problem because it was just about the worst at higher volumes at picking up that I was issuing that phrase, which I won't say because someone might be listening to this on a speaker and it might set all sorts of things into situations. But the activation phrase, it wouldn't hit it if I was on volume about 6 or above. A lot of the time where other competing speakers, their distance microphones seem to be a little bit better at discerning that. Adam, was that your experience?
I don't know about at 6, but I did find at the very high volumes, like I had it up at sort of 9 and 10 to test the distortion. And yes, you were shouting. And
you still
at
have
the damn
hearing
thing.
left?
Yeah, you're shouting at the damn thing, and it couldn't hear you. But that's not unreasonable. And I couldn't see anyone really ever wanting to play one of these things that loud. At 6, I would
You've
say
never
it's a bit
been
of
to
a
one of my
problem.
parties, then.
But I found that I think the Max might have better speakers in it. Better microphones in it, though, in general. When it's quiet, I think it was picking me up from further away than some of the smaller Google speakers, so that was interesting. But yeah, there does come a point, if you're going to crank it up, at least past 7 or 8, you need to be within arm's reach of the damn thing to turn it off.
Adam, I confirm that absolutely. I think the Google speakers are actually better at picking up voice than most of the others. The Panasonic's an example of this. If you play the Panasonic GA10 at any sort of level, it's almost impossible to communicate with it because its mics can't differentiate. And this is the problem. This is why Skype disappeared off televisions, because it's the far field, even though the Google Home Max has got far field voice recognition in it, but whether or not it can work over the random noise of a house once something's playing loud is a bit harsh. We're seeing a lot of hi-fi now which is saying, you can voice control us for turning the volume up and down, but you're absolutely right. As soon as you're playing it in anger, it doesn't work.
That just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Corinne for joining us for the show.
Thanks for having me again.
And also thanks to Jez for joining us.
Pleasure, guys. Anytime.
As always, we love to get your feedback on the show, so feel free to comment via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
Thanks everyone for listening, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your great podcasts. Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.